Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. I don't know about all of you, but I definitely get into a little bit of a post-holiday slump after Christmas and New Year's. Suddenly, all the excitement is over, and for a couple of weeks it feels like there's nothing to look forward to. Saying that out loud, it actually sounds way more depressing than it actually is. Seriously, I do get over it pretty quickly. Anyway though, to give myself and hopefully some of you out there a pick-me-up, this week we decided to do something on the lighter side and take a look at even more crime stories where suspects were hit with instant karma. Honestly, I could do these kinds of lists forever, so please tell us if you want more of these kinds of videos in the future. Speaking of which, if you find our videos interesting and informative, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a few of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. With that out of the way, here are even more criminals who were hit with instant karma. In the early morning hours of July 26, 2009, a 25-year-old man named Mitchell Deslat was driving down Interstate 10 on the outskirts of the city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when he decided to stop and try to find a place to stay for the night. After spotting what appeared to be a small hotel, he got off at the highway's Highland Road exit and pulled into the parking lot, leaving his vehicle just outside the building while he went inside to inquire about renting a room. Though Deslat found the front door locked, after knocking, he was quickly buzzed in by someone inside and approached the front desk. However, it was at this point that everything went sideways for the 25-year-old. Although Deslat would indeed be spending the night there, and free of charge to boot, he would soon learn that it wasn't because he was loaded down with travel reward points. His accommodations would also be less than desirable. He was most likely going to be sharing a room, and let's just say, there wasn't going to be any kind of continental breakfast. You see, Deslat wasn't in a hotel at all. He had just walked into the Troop A headquarters of the Louisiana State Police. According to reports from the time, prior to showing up at the police building, Deslat had allegedly been driving drunk. Needless to say, officers were a little more than suspicious when the 25-year-old stumbled inside and asked them if he was in a hotel. He was promptly arrested and booked for a DWI. While almost all of the incident can likely be chalked up to Deslat's alleged alcohol intake that night, we'll give him credit for one small thing. While looking up pictures of the police headquarters on Google, we did notice that the building does have a porte cochere. You know, those little covered outdoor entrances meant to be used by vehicles for pickups and drop-offs that you always see at hotels. That being said, it wasn't the embarrassing mix-up that was the problem. It was the whole drunk driving thing. Thankfully, though, no one was hurt, and we can only hope that it was a wake-up call for the 25-year-old. It's been said that karma is a boomerang. Good or bad, whatever you put out into the universe will eventually come back to you. Of course, most of the time, that boomerang is understood to be metaphorical, though, as one Maryland man found out in 2018, that's not always the case. According to reports, it all started shortly after 4 a.m. on September 20th of that year, when a man showed up to a closed carry-out restaurant on the 4000 block of Suitland Road in Prince George's County. After shattering an outside window with what appeared to be a brick, the man stepped inside, presumably intent on burglarizing the place. Before being able to make it behind the business's front counter, though, the suspect was met with more glass. Once again, he reached for his trusty brick, throwing it just as he had at the outside window. However, this time, the brick merely bounced off the glass and fell to the floor. Undeterred, the man picked up the brick and threw it even harder. Again, same result. Unfortunately for the would-be burglar, what he didn't realize was that it didn't matter how hard he launched the brick. He wasn't getting through that glass. You see, it was bulletproof. On what would be the man's third and final try, he grabbed the brick and wound up, presumably throwing it as hard as he could. This time, though, not only did it not break the bulletproof glass, it came flying back at him at considerable speed, striking him in the head. The entire embarrassing situation was captured on the restaurant's surveillance system, which also observed as the would-be burglar slowly crumpled to the ground, clearly in a considerable amount of pain. After lying on the floor for a few minutes, the man finally managed to pull himself together, fleeing the scene empty-handed. In the aftermath of the incident, Prince George's County Police released images taken of the suspect at the crime scene in the hopes that he could be identified, dubbing him the Bad Luck Bandit. While it's unclear whether the man was ever caught, given the relatively petty nature of the crime, I think we can all agree that his own brick handed out a punishment much harsher than any jail sentence. As the old saying goes, there is no honor among thieves. It's a lesson that one pair of Utah shoplifters apparently learned the hard way at the tail end of 2011. According to reports, it all started sometime late in the afternoon on December 15th of that year, when 47-year-old Corinne Van Houten and 36-year-old Eldon Alexander walked into a Winco food store in the city of Ogden. Once inside, the couple began walking around, grabbing items such as makeup, energy bars, and batteries off of the supermarket's shelves. After picking up about $25 worth of products, the pair reportedly tried to walk out the front door without paying. Despite ostensibly having done their best to act naturally, Van Houten and Alexander's alleged shoplifting did not go unnoticed by the supermarket's surveillance cameras. After being captured on video, the two were approached by store security, who detained them in their office and recovered the assortment of unpaid merchandise in their possession. Given that this was hardly the crime of the century, and the couple had reportedly tried to take exclusively small-ticket items, once a police officer arrived at the scene, Van Houten and Alexander were each issued a misdemeanor citation for shoplifting and were sent on their way. Not so bad, right? Wrong. As the police officer was preparing to leave the supermarket, he was once again flagged down. Only this time, it was by Van Houten and Alexander. It turned out that their truck had been burglarized. Ironically, the items that had been stolen from inside were worth about $60, meaning that they had now technically lost more than double the amount that they had tried to steal from the Winco in the first place. The irony didn't stop there, though. Using the same surveillance camera system that had just busted Van Houten and Alexander for shoplifting, authorities were able to find out that the couple's vehicle had been broken into after police had arrived at the scene and were in the middle of writing them a citation. This meant that if the pair hadn't tried to steal from the store in the first place and had simply purchased the $25 worth of items, they likely would have left the area before the other suspect had the opportunity to break into their truck. To top it all off, police at the time told local media that it was relatively rare for them to receive reports of car burglaries from that particular shopping plaza. At around 5:30 p.m. on August 29th, 2017, two masked men approached the carry-out counter of Monahan's Pub, a restaurant and bar in the community of Woodlawn, Maryland. After walking up to an employee there, one of the men pulled out what appeared to be a handgun and demanded cash from the register. The employee handed over the money before the two suspects fled on foot. That's when the employee called police. Or, should we say, called out to police. You see, it turned out that it wasn't just any ordinary afternoon at Monahan's. That day, the pub was hosting a retirement party for a 29-year veteran of the Baltimore County Police. Suffice it to say, the place was packed with off-duty officers, several of whom almost immediately started running after the two suspects. Despite quickly finding themselves on the losing end of a foot chase, the suspects reportedly refused to give up, even after one of them was tackled to the ground. Eventually, both men were arrested and later identified as 21-year-old Joseph McInnes III and 22-year-old Tyree McCoy. Reports aren't exactly clear about whether one or both of the men were armed, but at least one of the weapons recovered at the scene was allegedly discovered to be a pellet gun. Both McCoy and McInnes were subsequently charged with a number of offenses, including armed robbery and theft. While we unfortunately weren't able to find any follow-up reports or records indicating whether the two men were convicted, sources from the time do mention one thing of note. It seems that McCoy and McInnes weren't merely the victims of bad luck. In an interview with local media, the owner of the pub expressed his surprise over the armed robbery, saying that it was a well-known hangout for police officers. A large reason why was the Baltimore County Police Precinct right around the corner. I think we can all agree that teenagers do a lot of dumb stuff. Thankfully, the bulk of it is mostly harmless, even when it's technically illegal. Yeah, defacing a Wendy's bathroom with a permanent marker is definitely against the law, but it's not exactly the crime of the century. And given the levels of boredom and immaturity at play here, it's really no surprise that teenagers and crimes like vandalism go together like peanut butter and jelly. That being said, there's an obvious difference between things like carving your name in a desk at school, or our previous Wendy's bathroom example, and doing things that are truly destructive. Unfortunately, though, there always seem to be those couple of people who take things too far. Those who don't seem to know the difference between being a nuisance and being a dick. Case in point, the morning of February 23, 2020, when police in Winnipeg, Manitoba, received a call about damage to a high-rise building in the city's downtown. Well, damage might be putting it lightly. According to reports, someone or some people had gone up to a vacant commercial lot on the 31st floor and spent over an hour absolutely trashing the place. The lot in question was a large viewing area above the Prairie 360 restaurant. Furniture had been destroyed and thrown everywhere, and most concerning of all, a good chunk of the viewing area's windows had been shattered, sending glass tumbling down more than 30 stories below. Thankfully, no pedestrians were injured, but because of the damage, police had to take special precautions before even going up to investigate. It was estimated that repairs would cost at least $30,000. Luckily, it didn't take long to find the culprits. In fact, to borrow an old horror movie trope, they were still very much inside the house. Or rather, inside an elevator. It turned out that the suspects, 3 17-year-old boys and a 14-year-old girl, had managed to gain access to the 31st floor thanks to an unsecured commercial elevator. Only, the elevator had crapped out on them on the way back down. When they called for help, staff at the building quickly put 2 and 2 together, and police placed the group of teens under arrest. All 4 were charged with break and enter and mischief over $5,000. Because they were all minors, their names were not released, and as a result, we don't know what ultimately happened to them. On the afternoon of July 19th, 2010, a woman named Jordan Sturm was standing outside of an office building in San Francisco's South of Market neighborhood, when out of nowhere, she was the victim of a robbery. The whole thing happened in an instant. 1 second, Sturm was holding an iPhone, and the next, it had been snatched out of her hand by a man who was riding past her on a bicycle. The man barely slowed down, leaving Jordan standing stunned on the sidewalk with no hope of catching up on foot. Fortunately, she didn't need to. You see, what the bicycle-riding bandit didn't know was that this was a crime of opportunity in more ways than one. The cell phone Sturm was carrying wasn't hers at all. It belonged to the company she worked for, Covia Labs, and as it happened, at the exact moment that the theft took place, they were in the middle of demonstrating one of their new products to a public relations firm. The product was a new piece of GPS tracking software called Alert and Respond. While Alert and Respond had been designed as a safety tool for police and military officers in the field, its live tracking capabilities were more than up to the task of following the unwitting iPhone thief. Before Sturm even came back inside the office to alert her colleagues as to what had happened, Covia Labs CEO David Kahn had realized something was up. He had been doing the other end of the demonstration from a laptop inside the office building and had noticed when the iPhone suddenly started speeding up. Police were called immediately, and in about 10 minutes, the alleged culprit, 31-year-old Horatio Torre, had been placed under arrest. He had barely made it half a mile from the crime scene. Torre was subsequently charged with grand theft and possession of stolen property. While the use of GPS tracking to bust the 31-year-old might sound a bit quaint these days, keep in mind that this was nearly 13 years ago, and before services like Apple's Find My iPhone were free or standard across mobile devices. As for Covia Labs, the incident was a double win. Not only did they get their phone back, but news of the foiled theft stirred up quite a bit of positive publicity at the time. In late December of 2012, 49-year-old Darren Kimpton of Northampton, England, was in a bit of a tight spot. Like many people, he was scrambling to do a bit of last-minute Christmas shopping and was hoping to find a couple of nice gifts for his elderly parents. The only thing was, he didn't have any money. While many people probably understand or can at least empathize with Darren's financial troubles, as you might have guessed, there's a second part to this whole situation that's far less relatable. You see, while Darren didn't have any money, what he did have was 36 prior convictions for burglary. And, as the old saying goes, old habits die hard. So it was that on the night of December 22nd, Darren found himself walking the streets of Northampton looking for a house to burglarize. His plan being to steal some items, sell them, and then use the cash to add a few more presents under the family Christmas tree. Unfortunately for the 49-year-old, however, the only adding that would be done that night would be to his rap sheet. Right off the bat, things didn't go particularly well for old Darren. The first house he tried to break into turned out to have a tricky lock, and rather than getting inside, the 49-year-old only managed to cut himself and bleed on the front door. He then fled the property empty-handed. A short time later, it seemed like Darren's luck might have turned around when he came across another home nearby. This one looked like a real piece of cake. A window right by the entrance was even already broken, meaning that he would only need to reach his arm through to let himself in through the door. Without hesitation, Darren went for it. At this point, you might be saying to yourself, wait, why was the front window shattered? It's a good question, and certainly one Darren should have asked himself that night. As it turned out, the answer was that this home had already been broken into that night by someone else. Not only that, but the homeowner was currently inside, still discussing the situation with police. Needless to say, they were all quite stunned when they saw Darren's arm reaching through the broken window, though probably not half as surprised as Darren himself, who realized far too late that he had just tried to break into a house full of cops. The 49-year-old was apparently arrested following a brief struggle. Soon after, authorities were able to link him to the first attempted break-in as well, since it had happened in the same area, and, he left his DNA all over the front door. According to reports from the time, Darren Kimpton was charged and later pleaded guilty to 2 counts of attempted burglary with intent to steal. Unfortunately, these reports do not mention what kind of sentence he received, and it's unclear whether the culprit who actually burglarized the second home before him was ever caught. If you're a regular viewer of our Crimes of the Week series, then you likely know that we cover our fair share of weird stories involving suspects who somehow seem to find themselves in various states of undress. People sneaking into places naked, out of places naked, driving vehicles naked, and of course, even trying to strip down in an often misguided attempt to fool law enforcement. Well, today, it seems that we've finally found the opposite. A situation where wearing clothes actually might have screwed a suspect over. And, as per usual, we have the state of Florida to thank for this gem of a story. It all started on the evening of May 23rd, 2012, when a 20-year-old man named Milton Hodges walked into a Lowe's home improvement store on Pleasant Hill Road in Osceola County. After apparently browsing through the garden center and pretending like he was there to buy some mango and banana trees, the 20-year-old abruptly whipped out a pair of scissors, holding them to the neck of one of the store's cashiers. It was at this point that he demanded money, explaining that this was a robbery. Unfortunately for Hodges, things quickly went sideways when the employee he had tried to take hostage managed to break free from his grip and run for help. After making another failed attempt at demanding money from a second cashier, the 20-year-old was forced to flee. Though witnesses chased Hodges from the crime scene, they weren't able to keep up with him forever. Eventually, he scaled the wall of a nearby resort, pulled a large knife from his pants, and stole a golf cart from one of the security guards there. While the resort was a decent size, fortunately for police who arrived soon after, Hodges was pretty easy to spot. You see, he hadn't just trespassed onto any old resort. He was now on the grounds of the Cypress Cove Nudist Resort and Spa. As virtually one of the only people at the resort wearing clothes, Hodges was not hard to follow. He was arrested at gunpoint a short time later after reportedly being cornered by police and threatening officers with his knife. Though the whole Lowe's nudist resort thing was bad enough for Hodges, it turned out that he was already wanted for a different crime that had taken place a few weeks earlier. In that case, he had been accused of an armed robbery at a Kangaroo Express store in his North Florida hometown of Green Cove Springs. According to state inmate records we were able to find, Hodges was ultimately sentenced to 15 years on the armed robbery charge and was given a further 20 years for golf cart jacking the security guard at the nudist resort. These same records state that he is currently incarcerated, with a scheduled release date sometime in November of 2031. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a minute to thank our amazing supporters over on Patreon. As many of you are aware, our situation on YouTube always seems to be a bit uncertain, but our patrons help to ensure that we can continue to make content like this long term without having to worry as much about what surprises might be thrown our way. Plus, patrons also get access to 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. If you'd like to help support the channel directly, head over to patreon.com/crimezone to join. You can also find that link in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care.